Well, let's try and round this off by talking about, what do we think about all of this generally, more holistically? Now we've discussed all of the individual spec points. What do we make of the overall machine? And I'm just going to quickly rifle through what Sony is telling developers about what this machine actually does. And they're talking about increased resolution, increased frame rates, extra ray tracing features, and dramatically higher effective resolution via machine learning. And yeah, that's kind of about it. There's no major pitch here to developers about beyond that. It is basically an enhanced version of the PlayStation 5. In which case, I'm not quite sure if it's actually going to expand the market as such. But for those who are possibly thinking about moving to PC, it might make them think twice. We can talk about possible price points as well, because I actually think that similar to PlayStation 4 Pro, this is very much designed to be affordable as well, an affordable machine. But ultimately, similar to PlayStation 4 Pro, it is very heavily weighted towards graphical enhancements as opposed to, being able to create denser, more richer games owing to that CPU limitation. Alex, final summary thoughts on this?
Oh, wow. Summarize it. Let me just...
Is it the machine that you find compelling?
I can answer that in a very simple way. If someone came to me and they said, Alex, I have a Ryzen 5 3600 and an RTX 2080. Should I buy an RTX 4070? I would say no. I would say you should upgrade other aspects of your CPU, definitely your CPU, and then look at a GPU at that point, because the entire system's performance will be uplifted in more meaningful ways than just what a GPU could do by its lonesome. And so for me, given how kind of lopsided this is, it does look like, oh, this is a GPU upgrade, and that is it. 4 years between a GPU upgrade, I guess that's okay on the PC side, but I would probably at that point want a new CPU as well too. So for me, I don't find it a super compelling reason to buy. And I'm curious to see how they market it as, we said 4K the first time, but we actually mean it this time or something like that. like I don't know how you advertise it.
Well, they're also talking about 8K with PSSR as well, which I think, what could I say? I had an 8K TV for 4 years, and I just never used 8K. I didn't find it at all compelling. No. So that doesn't particularly strike me as a great selling point. And even in the developer disclosures, 8K is something that's going to happen later. It's not clearly a prime development consideration.
No, I hope not.
Yeah.
To go back what I was saying. So if I was looking at this in PC terms, I would say this is not a great upgrade, holistically. One other thing I think that is really interesting is the strategy. Sony apparently here went and rolled their own custom silicon, whatever it is, to get machine learning performance on the GPU, and then rolled their own software on that. It's kind of a weird thing for them to do when they're leveraging AMD. And AMD, perhaps it points to either AMD not having these things ready in time or not having them at all. Or maybe these things are going to feed back into later AMD designs because Sony invested in them and they have like this partnership. But I find that just like, man, only if they were there 4 years ago with this, or where NVIDIA was at, because it's kind of retroactively going back and trying to fix the parts where PlayStation 5 is weakest at the moment, other than the CPU, where it's saying like, we're not that good at, RDNA 2 is bad at RT. RDNA 2 doesn't have machine learning. So let's do those things for our Pro upgrade. I find that just interesting from just like a development perspective over what AMD's been up to. And I'm curious to see what that means for the next Xbox as well too. If this is what Sony's doing, I don't know if Microsoft could leverage that IP for their box. I have no idea how this all works, but I'm excited to see what comes next. But I'm not super impressed. I just really like that they're going into the machine learning space right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oliver?
Yeah, I think they are probably trying to capture a certain kind of gamer who's like very, very invested in their ecosystems and in their consoles and who spend a lot of money on games and who might also be interested in the PC. Personally, I don't think I'm the majority view on this, certainly from viewing comments online, but I'm very interested in the PS5 Pro. I'm very interested in more advanced console hardware. You know, for me, this is like, hey, you know, another enhanced console. I love the enhanced consoles. They kind of keep, they do keep parity to some degree with PC hardware. We saw that last generation where, you know, an Xbox One X, even in 2019, 2020, that was still a really high quality GPU, now CPU. Different story. Same deal here, of course. But the idea of just improving image quality to me is not that exciting. And if that's what the system will primarily be used for, just producing, like, let's say you have your typical PS5 game that might be doing like a 900p or 720p to 1440p upscale in a performance mode. And now you have the wherewithal, the performance, and the machine learning hardware and AI inferencing model to bring that up to 1080p to 4K or 1152p to 4K. That is exciting in some sense, but it's also just like, okay, well, you gave me a clean image. I'm still not quite there, maybe in terms of parity to the PC feature set, and that's kind of more what I'm interested in. I'm more, you know, someone who's interested in playing a game like Path Trace Cyberpunk on a console, and if this is not going to be all that much more in that direction of travel, then that's not a super exciting system. I'm sure people will leverage it for things like that, but the limited CPU performance could make that an issue. So yeah, I think this is an exciting console for me personally. I do want to see what developers end up doing with it, and I imagine that when Sony comes out that they will have some, I have to imagine, pretty compelling showcases of what the hardware can do if they actually do expect people to pick this up this holiday without a huge imperative in terms of the display technology to guide them to a new console.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm in two minds about this because I understand exactly where Alex is coming from. Because we are finding the limits of the CPU on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. And it's kind of disappointing to see that. You know, when you go to Act 3, Baldur's Gate 3, it's clearly an issue. There are other titles coming along where CPU has been proven to be a bit of an issue. And that isn't going to change anything here. You'll get a marginal increase at the expense of basically completely negligible impact on GPU performance. So it's kind of like, you know, an extra 10% of CPU is a nice to have, but it's not actually going to change the game in any sort of meaningful way. And yeah, so from that perspective, it is a bit of a disappointment, but it's entirely in line with the last time we saw a Pro console, right? What I will say, though, is that, what can I say? Extra GPU power, machine learning based upscaling, it's going to solve so many of the issues that we're currently seeing with current gen titles. And maybe those issues aren't really affecting a lot of people at the moment, but you know, for the people that are disgruntled by it, the PlayStation 5 Pro is going to fix all of that. And I think that's pretty special. I also really like the idea of a machine learning block being a part of a console. Because, you know, it's the direction of travel, right? AI is going to be so important going into the next generation. So the idea that developers have access to that hardware right here, right now, and are able to start experimenting with it, I think it's just going to be great for games across the board. And we might actually see more than just upscaling using that particular hardware. I mean, 300 tops, it's pretty potent piece of machine learning silicon that's incorporated into the GPU there. I guess that's the other thing, of course, is that it does seem to be entirely integrated into the GPU. It's not an NPU, as we're seeing in some of the other AMD silicon at the moment. So I think that's a conscious decision from Sony, and it does kind of mirror the design decisions taken by NVIDIA and Intel in the past. Yeah. It's the right way to go, I think. So yeah, very interested to see what they're going to be doing with this. But it is interesting that, you know, in terms of the possible game enhancements that Sony itself is describing to developers, it is basically, you know, not a game changer. But I actually think once you go hands-on and see the games and see what this machine learning upscaling can do, compare it to what the PlayStation 5 is doing, and it's it should be a lot better. Final discussion point, Oliver. Do you think Microsoft are going to respond to this? I don't think they can, because, basically Phil Spencer's already ruled out a Pro console. But at the same time, there has been talk of exciting announcements coming in the holiday season. So where do you think this sits?
I actually think that's a really good question, because if you look back to the FTC leak from Microsoft back, I think last September, you had them sketch out a console that's actually, look at that in broad strokes. That is pretty darn similar to what Sony is delivering 4 years into this generation in terms of what they're trying to do with machine learning, in terms of the areas of ideation, what they want to do with that machine learning hardware, when they want to do lots of stuff with enhanced ray tracing, all this other stuff in there. It does sound a little bit like this console, and obviously, Microsoft has a bit bigger vision for it potentially than what Sony is outlining in this document. But it certainly does seem a lot like that console, and I kind of think that as time goes on and as we see more software mooted for this machine, that actually might become a more interesting console.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It does put Microsoft in a bit of a difficult position right now, because I don't think they will have a Pro console. I think they're likely to announce a handheld, which is an entirely different proposition and exciting in its own right. But the concept of having 3 different Xbox Series machines, it just doesn't really make sense. Doubling down on Xbox Series when they're having so many issues selling hardware, I don't think it's going to shift the needle that much. And actually, when you think about it, Xbox One X, despite being an absolutely fantastic console, the best of its generation, didn't really shift the needle in terms of PlayStation dominance there either. I think they're just going to double down on next gen. Maybe they'll bring forward next gen. I mean, there's been talk of 2026, which would be ambitious, I'd say, when they're talking about the biggest generational leap ever. Mm-hmm. But it does sort of, mean that right now, at least at the top end side of things, that, PlayStation 5 Pro will be in a class of its own, unless, there has been a radical shift behind the scenes and Phil Spencer has changed his mind, effectively. Let's talk pricing. Alex, what do you think?
100 more on top of whatever the current is? Maybe. Yeah. I think that sounds right. That puts it, it depends on your territory, but it's a expensive console at that point.
Yeah. Oliver?
I think 600 USD or $100 more, the equivalent in your local currency, but with no disk drive, but with a detachable disk drive support.
I would be quite upset if a Pro console was launched with features that the base one, without features that the base one has. I mean, there is a report from Tom Henderson, whose sourcing so far has been impeccable, that says that it is compatible with the existing detachable drive, or at the very least that it has a detachable drive. So there is going to be some component in there.
Oh no.
Yeah. So whether they actually launch it without one,
that's going to be quite looking at that detachable drive.
Well, I'm just looking at this thing and thinking about how the aesthetics of that would go, presuming that it is the same detachable drive model.
Oh no!
You got this kind of like ugly protrusion here. Maybe if they made it more angular. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of that personally.
No.
From my personal perspective, I think there'll probably be a soft price cut on PlayStation 5, because it's been selling below RRP, or MSRP rather, for a long time in specific marketing periods. So it may well be the case that there will be more than a $100 price differential in real terms, but in MSRP terms, it probably will be an extra $100. And when you look at the design of the machine, I doubt the memory is actually, the faster memory is actually going to be an increased cost consideration. There'll be possibly some extra memory to accommodate the extra, moving non-essential stuff from system memory onto DDR, as was the case with PlayStation 4 Pro, to free up that extra memory for titles. But I think the main expense is going to be the much larger chip, right? That just makes sense. You go from 36 to 60 CUs. Beyond that, I guess it would be just the cooling assembly, right? That would be more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless there's something we just don't know yet about this machine, but that does seem likely. I think that's really all I've got to say about the PlayStation 5 Pro at the moment. But, you know, we're in the situation where we're recording this before GDC. If historical precedent means anything, there's a good chance we'll get some sort of disclosure from Sony during the event. Maybe even today, which means we've just filmed a lot of this for nothing.
No!
But yeah, I suspect there's going to be more developer documentation leaks before too long, because there is a lot of stuff on there. Any final words, or can we just wrap this one up?
I got
Alex?
one last thing. Why is Sony eating Microsoft's lunch? Man, they came to the table with machine learning upscaling before the Xbox Series X did, and they advertised that for the Xbox Series X. Like, man, they're just eating Microsoft's lunch.
They said it was an
day.
area of active research the last time I spoke to Microsoft about it.
Sure.
And the Series X actually has pretty respectable machine learning performance. I think it's like 47 tops int 8 or 48 tops int 8. So it is like it's a lot slower than what Sony is mooting in this document, but it probably is fast enough for something, judging from the PC side with XeSS, right? It's like
it's fast enough for something, that's for certain. They've never done it.
There's actually something maybe we can quickly clarify here, because some people seem to believe that Xbox Series consoles do have dedicated machine learning silicon, and they do to a certain extent, but it's not the same as what PS5 Pro is doing, right, Alex?
I mean, well, I would still just like to say they still haven't shown like a diagram of what this GPU looks like, so I don't want to 100% say it's exactly the same thing, but I'll just say like them just making it so that the GPU can run certain instructions at double the rate is still using the entire GPU to do that entire process on the Series X. Versus what NVIDIA and Intel do, and I'm hoping Sony did here, where there's a dedicated different part of the GPU, and many of them, not like an NPU that's separate, but like in each CU, there's like another unit or adjacent unit that just does these type of maths, and that's all it does. And that would be a Tensor Core or the XMX units in Intel, and that's different, and there's a reason why it's better. That's why people are moving to it. That's why Apple's doing it, right? So, yeah.
I mean, if we're talking about a 2 millisecond computational cost, it kind of rules out anything else, really, doesn't it? Depending on what PSSR actually is, of course.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know how small or big the model is or all these things, but I would assume it. I would hope it's pointing to the fact that we actually have this as a dedicated unit on the GPU. And that's why it is 2 milliseconds.